On the happiest day of her life, Emily Carter's loyal German shepherd, Buddy, blocked her path, and she had no idea the heartbreaking truth he was trying to tell her. Standing in her childhood bedroom, Emily adjusted the veil on her carefully styled curls, her ivory gown shimmering in the morning light. The day was everything she had ever envisioned, meticulously planned for over a year. But Buddy, lying at her feet, wasn't his usual energetic self. His amber eyes, once vibrant with joy, now held a weight that made her chest tighten. Emily crouched to run her fingers through his fur. "What's wrong, boy? You don't like the dress?" she teased, masking the unease bubbling inside her. Buddy had been more than a pet, he was family. Rescued from Haven Animal Shelter as a scruffy pup, he'd grown into her steadfast companion. Through heartbreak, triumph, and every moment in between, he'd been her constant. Yet today, something was different. His stillness, his solemn gaze, it was as if he was trying to tell her something Emily couldn't yet understand. She straightened, brushing aside the nagging feeling. Today was supposed to be perfect. What could possibly go wrong? Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now let's get started. Emily gave Buddy one last scratch behind his ears before heading toward the vanity table to check her makeup. "Daniel's going to love this dress," she said, her voice soft and hopeful. Normally, Buddy would wag his tail at the sound of her fiancé's name, but today he remained still, watching her with those same heavy eyes. Before Emily could process the unease creeping through her, her mother, Margaret, poked her head into the room. "Sweetheart, the makeup artist is waiting. We don't have all day." "Coming, Mom!" Emily called back, smoothing her dress. As she turned, Buddy slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, almost labored, and the creak of his joints made Emily wince. Her heart ached at the reminder of his age. He wasn't the spry puppy she'd rescued all those years ago. Time had made its mark on him too. Margaret frowned as Buddy followed Emily out of the room. "Does he really have to come along?" she asked. "This is your wedding day, not a dog show." "You know how much he means to me, Mom," Emily replied firmly. "He's family." Downstairs, the house was a flurry of wedding day chaos. Chloe, Emily's maid of honor and best friend, was adjusting her pale blue dress when she noticed Buddy's subdued demeanor. "Is he okay?" Chloe asked, concern lacing her voice. Emily knelt beside Buddy, running her hand along his back. "I think he's just overwhelmed by all the excitement. He's always been sensitive to big events." She forced a smile, but deep down, doubt gnawed at her. Buddy had been quieter for days, eating less and moving slower, but the whirlwind of wedding preparations had left her no time to take him to the vet. Margaret's voice cut through the moment. "Emily, we need to leave soon. The photographer's already waiting at the chapel." Emily took a deep breath and stood. "Come on, Buddy," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but for now, she had to focus on the day ahead, or at least try to. The car ride to Meadowview Chapel was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and Emily's soft humming. Buddy rested his head on her lap, his warm breath seeping through the layers of her gown. Normally, he'd sit upright, tail wagging, eager to see where they were headed. But today, he pressed into her as if he didn't want her to leave his side. Emily stroked his head absent-mindedly, trying to calm her own nerves. She wasn't anxious about marrying Daniel, she was certain about him. But the weight in Buddy's gaze, his unusual clinginess, made her chest tighten. She pushed the thought aside as the car pulled up to the chapel. The late morning sun bathed the churchyard in golden light. Emily stepped out, the gentle rustle of her gown blending with the murmur of arriving guests. Buddy followed closely, his paws nearly brushing her heels. "Let's get some pictures of the bride by the oak tree," the photographer called out, motioning toward the sprawling branches draped in autumn leaves. Emily smiled and moved toward the spot, but as she did, Buddy stepped in front of her. "Buddy, come on, boy," she said gently, trying to guide him away. But Buddy didn't budge. He pressed against her legs, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Emily, we're losing light here," the photographer urged, but she couldn't take her eyes off Buddy. His breathing was heavier now, his sides rising and falling faster than they should. "Maybe he needs a walk," Chloe offered, reaching for his leash. But Buddy pushed closer to Emily, nearly causing her to stumble. Emily knelt, her dress pulling around her. "Buddy, what's wrong?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She placed a hand on his side and felt the rapid thrum of his heartbeat. Panic flickered in her chest. Her mother's voice cut through the tension. "Emily, we need to stay on schedule." Emily shook her head, her eyes still on Buddy. "Something's wrong," she said firmly, her voice cracking. "He's trying to tell me something." Emily's knees wobbled as she knelt beside Buddy, her fingers trembling against his fur. His heartbeat was frantic, each thump resonating with a warning she couldn't ignore. "Buddy, what is it?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Around her, the world buzzed with wedding preparations, but for Emily, time had stopped. "Emily!" Margaret's voice was sharp, her heels clicking across the cobblestones. "We don't have time for this. The guests are arriving." Chloe crouched beside Emily, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Emily," she said softly, "he's not okay. You need to call someone." Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat and grabbed her phone with shaking hands. The name Dr. Williams glowed on the screen as she hit dial. It rang twice before a calm voice answered. "This is Haven Veterinary Care. This is Emily Carter. It's Buddy, he's struggling to breathe, and his heart is racing," Emily said, her words spilling out in a rush. "Please, I need help. Bring him in immediately," the receptionist instructed. "Dr. Williams is here. We'll be ready." Emily hung up, her decision made. She turned to her mother, whose face was a mixture of exasperation and disbelief. "I'm taking Buddy to the vet," Emily said firmly. "Emily, think about what you're saying," Margaret snapped. "This is your wedding day." Her father's voice cut through the tension. "Margaret, let her go." He stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "Buddy has been by her side through everything. If he needs her now, she needs to be there for him." Emily's tears spilled over as she hugged her father. "Thank you," she whispered. Chloe grabbed Buddy's leash and helped Emily gather her skirts. "I'll drive you," she said without hesitation. Margaret hesitated for a moment before snapping into action. "I'll handle the guests," she announced, her tone softer. "Chloe, call the reception venue. We'll push everything back if we need to." Emily and Buddy climbed into the back seat of Chloe's car, her wedding dress billowing around her like a cloud. Buddy rested his head in her lap again, his breathing shallow but steady for now. As the car sped toward Haven Veterinary Care, Emily's mind raced with memories. She remembered the day she found Buddy at the shelter, a scruffy pup cowering in the corner. She promised him that day he'd never have to feel alone again. Now, as she stroked his graying fur, she whispered, "I'm keeping that promise, Buddy. I won't let you face this alone." The car came to a halt outside the clinic. Dr. Williams stood at the entrance, his face calm but serious. Chloe opened the door, and Emily gently lifted Buddy into her arms. Her gown brushed the ground as she carried him inside, her heart pounding as hard as his. Emily sat on the floor of the examination room, her wedding dress pulled around her like a fragile cocoon. Buddy lay on the padded table beside her, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. She held his paw, her fingers trembling as she whispered reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear. Dr. Williams entered, his expression composed but serious. He carried a clipboard, but it was his gentle voice that made Emily's heart race. "Emily," he began softly, "thank you for bringing Buddy in so quickly. We've run some initial tests, and I want to be honest with you." Her breath caught in her throat. She nodded, clutching Buddy's paw tighter. "Buddy has developed advanced cardiac disease, heart failure," Dr. Williams said. "At his age, the condition has likely been progressing for some time. The excitement and stress today likely exacerbated his symptoms. Emily's world tilted. But he was fine just a few days ago, she murmured, her voice barely audible. These conditions can progress rapidly, Dr. Williams explained. The good news is that with medication, we can manage his symptoms and keep him comfortable. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. We're looking at months rather than years. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she leaned her forehead against Buddy's. I'm so sorry, Buddy, she whispered. She felt his tail twitch weakly against her arm, as if reassuring her. Chloe stepped closer, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. He knows you're here. That's what matters. Dr. Williams gave Emily a moment before continuing. I can administer the first dose of medication now and walk you through the care plan. Buddy is still fighting, Emily, but he'll need your strength to get through this. Emily nodded, wiping her tears. Do whatever you need to do. I promised him he'd never be alone, and I'm keeping that promise. Dr. Williams began the treatment, while Emily sat beside Buddy, her hand never leaving his paw. Despite the heartbreak, her resolve grew stronger with each passing moment. Emily remained beside Buddy, her hand never leaving his paw, even as Dr. Williams explained the details of his treatment plan. Her thoughts were scattered, her focus shifting between the doctor's calm voice and the gentle rise and fall of Buddy's chest. She felt the weight of each breath he took, fragile and precious, as if every moment might slip away. The door opened, and Daniel entered, still in his tuxedo, his face a mixture of concern and determination. How's Buddy? He asked softly, moving to kneel beside Emily. Emily's voice wavered. Heart failure, she whispered. Dr. Williams says we can manage it for a while. But it's not long. Daniel placed his hand over hers, grounding her. Then we'll make it count, he said, his voice steady. He's family, Emily. We'll be there for him like he's always been there for us. Before Emily could respond, Chloe and Ryan appeared, carrying a small bouquet salvaged from the wedding venue. Chloe's eyes sparkled with an idea. Why don't you get married here? Emily stared at her, confused. Here? In the clinic? Ryan grinned, already texting. The minister's just down the road at the chapel. Your parents are okay with it, and Buddy can be part of it. It's perfect. Emily glanced down at Buddy, who managed a faint thump of his tail as if giving his approval. She looked at Daniel, her voice soft. What do you think? Daniel smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. I think nothing matters more than us being together. Let's do it. Within an hour, the waiting room of Haven Veterinary Care transformed. Staff members hurried to clear a space while a technician found a white cloth to drape over a table, improvising an altar. The soft hum of medical equipment faded into the background as the minister arrived, his calming presence filling the room. Emily stood, her wedding dress wrinkled but radiant, her hair falling in loose curls around her shoulders. Daniel adjusted his tie, his gaze fixed on her as if nothing else in the world mattered. Buddy lay comfortably on a blanket between them, a small bow tie clipped to his collar, his presence a quiet reminder of love's enduring strength. The ceremony began with heartfelt simplicity. The minister spoke of love's ability to endure challenges, and Emily felt each word resonate deeply. She and Daniel exchanged vows, their voices trembling but filled with unwavering conviction. As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Buddy gave a soft woof, breaking the tension and drawing laughter from everyone present. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel leaned in to kiss Emily, his hand gently resting on Buddy's side. Applause erupted, and even the clinic staff couldn't hold back their smiles. It wasn't the grand affair Emily had spent months planning, but in every way that mattered, it was perfect. That evening, instead of a lavish reception, Emily and Daniel found themselves at home, still in their wedding attire. Take-out Chinese food replaced the gourmet menu, and a flickering candle sat in place of the elaborate centerpiece. Buddy lay between them, his head resting on Emily's lap while Daniel fed him small bites of plain chicken. The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of packaging and their gentle murmurs. I always knew Buddy would be part of this day, Daniel said, his voice thoughtful. but I didn't realize how much he'd teach me about love." Emily smiled, her fingers tracing patterns in Buddy's fur. "He's shown us what really matters. Love isn't about perfection or plans. It's about being there, through everything." As Buddy let out a contented sigh, Emily and Daniel sat in peaceful silence. They didn't need a grand reception or a crowded ballroom. What they had was perfect, a quiet moment of love, shared with the one who had brought them together. The spring evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a soft blanket spread beneath her as Buddy rested his head in her lap. The flickering light from a single candle cast gentle shadows on the walls, and Daniel knelt beside her, his hands gently stroking Buddy's back. Over the past 6 months, they had treasured every moment with him. On his good days, Buddy managed short walks to the park, his tail wagging faintly as he sniffed the air. On the harder days, Emily and Daniel stayed by his side, reading aloud or simply sitting in quiet companionship. But tonight was different. Buddy's breaths came slower now, shallow and labored, as if each one was an effort. His once vibrant amber eyes had softened, but they still held the same unwavering love that had guided Emily through so much of her life. Emily leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against Buddy's. "You've been so brave," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've given us so much." Daniel's voice was soft but steady as he added, "It's okay, Buddy. We're here. You can rest now." Buddy let out a deep, contented sigh, his body relaxing as if he'd been waiting for their reassurance. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She cradled his head in her hands, her fingers brushing over the graying fur she'd come to know so well. "You've kept every promise you ever made to us," Emily murmured, her words trembling with emotion. "You protected me, loved me, and taught me what it means to truly care for someone." The candlelight flickered, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the room held its breath. Buddy's chest rose and fell one final time, and then he was still. Emily clutched him close, her sobs muffled against his fur. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, his own tears falling silently. The quiet was overwhelming, yet it was filled with a sense of gratitude for the years of love Buddy had shared, for the lessons he had taught them, and for the bond that would never fade. For a long time neither of them moved. They stayed there, holding Buddy, surrounded by the echoes of his presence. The memories of his wagging tail, his playful bark, and the way he'd always been there when they needed him filled the room. Finally, Emily whispered, "Thank you, Buddy. For everything. For choosing me." A year had passed since Buddy's quiet goodbye, yet his presence lingered in every corner of Emily and Daniel's home. His collar, now hanging beside their wedding photo, was a constant reminder of the love he had shared and the lessons he had taught. But the house felt quieter, emptier, a void only love could fill. One sunny afternoon, Emily and Daniel walked into Haven Animal Shelter, the same shelter where Emily had first met Buddy so many years ago. The familiar sounds of barking dogs and the soft chatter of volunteers brought a wave of nostalgia, but also a sense of purpose. "We're looking to adopt," Emily said warmly to the staff member who greeted them. "Preferably a senior dog." The worker's face brightened. "That's wonderful. Most people look for puppies, but our older dogs need love too. Let me show you someone special." At the end of a quiet row of kennels, they stopped in front of a senior golden retriever named Rusty. His fur was flecked with gray, and his warm brown eyes carried a gentleness that immediately reminded Emily of Buddy. He stood slowly, his movements stiff with age, and approached the gate to press his nose against Emily's hand. "This is Rusty," the staff member explained. "He's 10 years old. His previous family couldn't care for him anymore, so he's been here for a few months. He's got arthritis, but he's a sweetheart." Emily knelt, tears welling in her eyes as Rusty leaned into her touch. "Hi, Rusty," she whispered. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" Daniel crouched beside her, stroking Rusty's ears. "He's perfect," he said, his voice filled with conviction. The adoption process was straightforward, and by evening, Rusty was settling into their home. Emily watched as he sniffed the living room, eventually curling up on Buddy's old bed by the fireplace. The sight brought a lump to her throat, but also a sense of peace. As she sat on the floor beside Rusty, Daniel joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It feels right, doesn't it?" he asked. Emily nodded, her fingers brushing through Rusty's fur. "It's not about replacing Buddy. It's about continuing what he taught us, how to love, even when it hurts." Rusty let out a contented sigh, his eyes closing as he settled into his new home. Emily leaned into Daniel, her heart full. The love Buddy had left behind wasn't gone, it had only grown, finding a new way to flourish. The late afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, bathing the space in a warm, golden light. Emily stood by the mantelpiece, holding Buddy's small bow tie collar in her hands. Its fabric was slightly worn, a testament to the years it had spent around the neck of her faithful companion. Beside her, Daniel held Rusty's new collar, its bright color a symbol of the fresh start they had given him. Together, they hung the two collars side by side, just beneath their wedding photo. The picture captured a moment of unplanned perfection, their vows exchanged in the veterinary clinic, with Buddy lying contentedly at their feet. Now, the collars framed the image, each one a quiet tribute to the love they had shared and the love they continued to give. As Emily stepped back to admire the display, she felt a lump rise in her throat. "It's not about how long we have with them, is it?" she said softly, her voice trembling. "It's about the love we give and the memories we create while we're together." Daniel nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "Buddy taught us that. And now Rusty's here to remind us. Love doesn't measure time, it measures moments." Rusty lay curled up on the rug by the fireplace, his tail wagging gently as if in agreement. The scene reminded Emily of the countless evenings she had spent in this same room with Buddy, sharing quiet companionship and simple joys. Above the mantelpiece, they placed a small plaque engraved with the words, "Sometimes, love isn't about the perfect plan. It's about the hearts that guide us home." Emily traced the words with her fingers, her mind flooded with memories, not just of Buddy, but of everything he had taught her. His loyalty, his unwavering presence, and his ability to find joy in the smallest things had left an indelible mark on her life. She turned to Daniel, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Do you think Buddy knew?" Daniel smiled softly. "I think he always knew. That's why he stayed with us as long as he could, so we'd be ready for this." Emily knelt by Rusty, stroking his golden fur. "And now, because of him, we know how to love better. To appreciate every single moment." Rusty nuzzled into her hand, his quiet affection filling the room with a sense of peace. In that moment, surrounded by the reminders of love past and present, Emily knew their story wasn't just about Buddy or Rusty. It was about a cycle of love that would continue, growing stronger with each new chapter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily and Daniel sat together on the couch, Rusty nestled between them. Above them, the collars swayed gently, a silent promise of love's enduring power.